Yeah, so one of the main differences that I guess between your job as a sports analyst and sports statistician and my job optimizing, medical supply chains and doing patient monitoring is that it seems like I have an advantage in that I can sort of win over the average. So I basically have, tens of thousands of times that I can make predictions on a given day, or that my algorithms are making predictions. Whereas, if you're in a game type setting, there's only a certain number of times you're going to get to decide whether or not to, try to kick a field goal or try to run or anything like that. So I guess I viewed it a little bit like how many times you get to flip a coin. So there's the probability that the coin's going to turn up heads and how many times you get to flip it. And one of my advantages is that I have a high probability of heads and I get to flip it a whole bunch of times in the meantime. Whereas
Sure.
it seems like there might be a bit more noise and fewer flips and Sunday morning quarterbacks willing to be an external factor. But yeah, is that correct, or am I totally off there?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the, kind of the beauties of sports is that, every game is only played once. And if you have a crucial decision to make, you're only going to get one outcome. And you never quite see, hey, if you make this decision, of course, whatever decision you went with, you're going to get the outcome from that. But you really don't ever see the flip side of the coin, that if you went in a different direction, what would have happened. And so that's kind of, part of what makes sports great is that you can have these great, what if conversations, but a lot of times those end up being unanswered questions because you're only going to get the one outcome. Certainly makes it challenging from our perspective in trying to drive people towards the correct decisions, or the mathematically optimal decisions, just because they're not going to get the benefits of having a large sample size of results to work from. And hey, you may only get one shot at this game that might decide their conference championship and things of that nature. And it's regardless of what they decide, it may or may not work out, and that can have some pretty big implications for them down the road.
Yeah, so I think the like two points there is that one, and I actually hadn't quite thought of this one, is that there's the absence of counterfactuals. And I guess part of me is wondering, are the coaches and the decision makers, are they cognizant and appreciative of the fact that there are no real counterfactuals, or do they try to create proposed counterfactuals? And then of course there's the small n problem, which is you're only going to have one game. So if you consider if your game is the totality of an observation, you're only going to have one of those maybe per week, for example, in season too. So you're going to have a small number of maybe like a dozen or so observations per year. And so are those two? Those are I guess two of the really big challenges.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And it's kind of interesting that if we start off with a new client and trying to get them to change their behaviors, it's really beneficial that if they have success on their first couple of attempts, because that just kind of drives them and encourages them to. We know in the long run, if they keep with it, it's going to work out. But there's just such an advantage that if they can kind of get off to a good start, and see some success with the choices that they're making, that they're much more likely to continue with that. Because it's difficult that if you have, like you said, it may only come up 10 or 12 times over the course of the season, and let's say you try something and it fails, and then that situation comes up again later in the game. It's really hard for them to pull the trigger in a similar situation just because they've got such a small sample size with which to work. And if they saw it before, like, hey, it didn't work out when you did it this time, it's just, really hard just to kind of, move past that sometimes just from a psychological perspective. And, again, as to your point that, they're dealing with a small sample size, worth of decisions. And so it's always helpful, for our teams just to kind of get off to a good start and feel good about it, and get some positive reinforcement from the choices that they're making.
Is there, on the issue of positive reinforcement and sort of getting those initial few successes, do you moderate sort of the advice or the strategy that you use going in? So saying like, okay, here's our first few clients. We aren't going to give them completely, wonky, counterintuitive suggestions, especially because, obviously they always have the right to veto what suggestions you make. So would you actually say like, I'm going to moderate my data-driven decision, or alternatively say, I'm going to only give them the ones where I can really illustrate the value in it. Saying like, here's my histogram or whatever. As I put up my nerd glasses, are we going to say, is there some sort of element there where you help gently lead them to the water, or
Yeah, I mean, every client is a little bit different, and they all start from different places. And that, our goal is to try to push them as close as we can towards, optimal strategy. And so, just kind of getting to know. We've had, some teams that have just been, that this is kind of something that they're really into, and I've always wanted to kind of be aggressive per se in the past, and this is just kind of fine tuning some of those recommendations, and they're really wanting to do it. But others are just a little bit more hesitant and wanting to dip their toes in the water. So yeah, so in cases like that, we just we try to push them without pushing them over the edge with some of our recommendations, and just knowing that hey, yes, while something this may be statistically optimal to make this recommendation. Our concern is that that's just going to kind of push them over the edge, and they're just going to say, "Hey, this is crazy," and we just don't want to. We're just going to do our own thing. So certainly there's a lot of psychology involved with that, and in talking to our guys, and I think education is a huge part of what we do. And helping them understand and get over just kind of those psychological hurdles towards making those better choices.
what helps come over those psychological hurdles? Because obviously there's the they have their own endogenous motivation, which is obviously their competitiveness, the fact that they'll see other people succeed, and it's hard to ignore that. So obviously no one wants to give up a competitive advantage that's there. But at the same time, exactly how to implement this. We aren't machines. We aren't robots. Well, most of us aren't. And uh, how do you? What are sort of the ways that you help someone go from saying, okay, I'm using old school sort of heuristic statistics, because it's not like statistics and data have never been used here. It's just the nature of how it's been interpreted. What are sort of those stages?
Yeah, it's interesting when we first got started with this that I just wanted to give our teams just a set of charts and just kind of assume that I had the answers and that they were going to follow along with that. And that was just an incredibly misguided thought that I had. I recall my first meeting I had with a small school in Alabama, Troy University, and was talking about going for it on fourth down in their own territory, and kind of walk through the logic behind it. And the head coach at the time had been there for 30 years and very established, and said, "Mike, this makes perfect sense, but if I try this and it fails, I'm going to be on the first train out of town." Mm-hmm. So you just kind of that was kind of an eye opener for me, just to say, hey, no, it's not just dots on the chart that are going to be important. It's that we've got to explain the logic behind that, and just keep reinforcing why it is that the math says what it does. So to answer your correct question directly, the different things that we do is that for each of our teams, we're going to give them feedback on their games. So just kind of breaking down that strategy. Hey, here's what was recommended. Here's what you did, and let's talk about if there's some differentials there. Here's why it was that the math recommended what it did. Another thing we look closely at is games and situations that come up around the country. So if we're trying to encourage our teams to go forward on fourth and short in their own territory, then we're going to look for games on Saturday and Sunday where teams are doing just that. So just kind of positively reinforcing it, like, hey, here's a situation where this team did it, we got success, they ended up scoring a touchdown, and so just trying to get them to accept that these are more the norms of behavior as things go along. And I think too, it's just trying to break down the stats into different concepts that they would understand. And a lot of football coaches are numbers people. It is very much a numbers type of game. So, I mean, they do, not all of them are, but, a lot of them, really do get into kind of the number crunching that we do. Um, but just, breaking things down, as a concept. So, I mean, you mentioned before about, heads and tails or things of that nature. And, just breaking down concepts like, hey, if you try this particular strategy at the end of the game, this gives you three different ways or three different pathways to win the game. So, kind of, a famous example, that we work with our teams. There's a game a dozen years ago between the Patriots and Colts on a Sunday Night Football. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Patriots were leading late in the game by 6 points, I believe, and had 4th and 2 in their own territory. They went for it. They missed. The Colts got a touchdown, won the game by a point. And Bill Belichick got absolutely skewered in the press as a result of that. And actually, in our early days, we would show us video clip to our clients as to, hey, here's kind of the feedback on ESPN. The analysts railing against it. And Ron Burgundy came in to do like a cameo, and it was pretty brutal. But from a math perspective, it was absolutely the proper choice to make, and it was by a long shot. And so just kind of how we break that down by our to our teams is that hey, that particular choice gave the Patriots three different ways of winning. They could make the first down on that fourth down. They would have been able to run out the clock. If they missed, they could still stop the Colts. And if the Colts score, hopefully they do so quickly, and that at least gives us a chance for a final possession. So having those three opportunities or three different ways of winning the game was vastly superior than the one option to win the game, which was punting to Peyton Manning and giving him 2.5 minutes to go down for winning touchdown drive. So that's kind of the different ways we try to explain it to our clients. Okay, it's having three different ways of winning is superior to one. We'll come up with different concepts, kind of like in that particular situation, we'll talk about, hey, this is a maximum aggression spot. And by maximum aggression, we mean that if you make a fourth down, you win the game. But if you punt, your opponent has more than enough time to come back and score themselves. So that's kind of like a unique spot in the game where going for it has like its maximum benefit. So we'll just coin different terms that correspond to various situations and hopefully just kind of make it sticky with our coaches that hey, we're at the end of the game and this situation comes up. My instincts may be telling us that, but we've talked about this ahead of time and kind of I'm familiar with the concept, and this is why the stats are recommending what they are, and so I might be feeling more comfortable making that choice.
Cool. Is so you've mentioned optimization and optimal choice several times.
Mm-hmm.
Do you tend to when you conceptualize this problem, do you tend to conceptualize it as an optimization problem? So the idea of like how can we make sequentially optimal choices, as opposed to, for example, you might just say like, I'm going to summarize different scenarios and the chance of success, and I'm going to focus my effort and prioritize essentially providing good descriptive statistics over a number of scenarios and then just hand those over. Obviously, it's probably a mix, but just what is your gut feeling when you go in?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, all of our recommendations are, what are the choices in game that are going to optimize our chances of winning?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just kind of developed based on a Monte Carlo simulation. And, those choices are going to change from week to week. Mm-hmm. So, 1 week you could be, particularly in college football, you could be, vastly superior to your opponent, or at least expected to be, better than that opponent. And then the next week you could be, a significant underdog. And so, you could be in a high scoring game, a low scoring game. You could have, a great kicker. Your kicker could stub its toe, and you're left with a backup kicker and playing in driving snowstorm or something like that. So. All those factors, kind of come into play, and also game situation, matters a lot as well in terms of our recommendation. So, kind of what we deliver to teams, the the main piece, or kind of the biggest portion of what we do is with fourth down decision making. And for that, again, that can vary from week to week, based on those game parameters and how good some of your specialists are. Again, whether you're the favorite or the underdog. But I mean, those are very specific recommendations that we provide. Both and that really goes throughout the course of the game, because what might be a good decision in the first quarter when the game is tied, may not be the best choice in the fourth quarter when you're down by 10. And so we just have a variety of charts that we create for our teams that just, with the concept being just focusing on fourth down decision making, that for any situation that comes up over the course of the game, we should be able to deliver a statistically accurate recommendation for what they should do for that in that exact set of circumstances.
On the issue of recommendations, so I have two questions that just sort of popped up. One is, and I'll ask both, and then we can figure out which one we want to tackle first.
Sure.
So when it comes to recommendations, do you essentially are coaches and staff handed essentially like a recommendation packet or something like that, like a decision charts? Because I guess I always like to think of it that like there's a statistician watching and they're sending the signals down, and like how much of it is a live decision, or versus how much of it is essentially they have a predetermined set of charts that help them decide. So there's one aspect, essentially the deployment of these types of things.
Sure.
And the second one is how many steps ahead do you look forward in your sort of optimal decision making? Because there's sort of like this like one step optimization versus two step optimization, and are those types of things still tractable in sports? I don't know. I'm just totally curious about what the answer is and how you approach it.
Sure. Just honest, I'm unfamiliar with the first step and second step optimization.
Oh, isn't like you try to look ahead multiple steps. So as you said, what you do when you're in the first quarter of a game, what's optimal there is different from what's ahead when you're in the fourth quarter of a game. And so or the fifth quarter of the game when it's still the Monday morning quarterback. But what's the how much of an effect does that sort of long-term look have? Like how much does it either cloud or make this decision more difficult, versus if we just always try to make good, like what's the next choice only, how do we optimize that next choice? And then once we made that, we'll make the next optimal choice from there. Okay.
Well, I'll start with your first question, and that's just kind of, how is this deployed, in the course of the game? And so I've got, it is actually, we've got, if you're watching a game, a lot of times you'll see a guy walking around behind the head coach, holding one of our binders.
Okay.
And it's kind of a mix between, we have what we call our book guys, and that's just someone we train on a particular team that knows how to interpret our charts and be able to deliver that information, to the head coach in real time. And so it's kind of a mixture in that some of our guys are down in the head, standing right behind the head coach, and others are kind of up in the booth, relaying that information, down to the coaches. But basically, just how it works is that for every set of downs that they might have on offense, again, there'll be charts that correspond to first quarter, end of first half, fourth quarter with varying point differentials. And then for each, they've got color coded based on where they are in the field, the number of yards they have to gain. But it sounds complicated, but at the start of each set of downs, basically the head coach is going to get a number from us. And based on the charts, we'll say something like, hey, we should be going for it at 4th and 3 or less, as an example. And so it's really a matter of preference amongst our teams as to when the head coach wants to get that information. Some of them want that right as a set of down starts. Some of them want to wait until it's second or third down. But the concept will be that hopefully by the time at least third down hits, that the head coach has received that information, that gives them a little bit of time to mull over the recommendation and kind of, include that as part of his decision-making process.
Hmm.
And, there's a lot of advantages to that. Let's say the recommendation is to go forward at 3. Head coach isn't completely comfortable with that, but it's that, hey, we'll go for it on 4th and 2 or less. Perfect. But that's good information for their offensive staff to know,
Hmm.
because that can help them with understanding what the third down play call might be. So if it's a 3rd and 5 or something like that, then the offensive play caller knows that, hey, I really want to get a first down here, but he knows that, hey, as long as I get 3 yards, I know that I can be able to take another crack at it on 4th down.
Hmm.
So having the information early allows the, again, guy following around with the head coach or getting that information over his headset. You can take that information, kind of include that along with his, particular instincts, for this situation. And then again, hopefully by 3rd down, they've arrived at a decision as to what they're willing to do.
Hmm.
And, that helps them with both making a good decision on 4th down. But then also one of the things that's really valuable is just to be able to make a decision quickly.
Hmm.
And that, a lot of times, what you'll see if you've watched a lot of football is that, a team will get to a critical spot in the game, have to make a tough decision, and you'll end up burning a timeout in order to make a choice. And then, quite frequently that timeout is not available later in order to have the ability to, manipulate the clock down the stretch. And so, that can be quite harmful. So, both being able to, it's one thing to be able to make good choices, but, also the peripheral benefits of being able to make that decision quickly, is also huge benefits. And, the offensive staff always appreciates, knowing what that recommendation is, that, it's often quite frustrating for, players and coaches alike that, if they get to 4th down and, they think that the decision might be, one way and then it goes a different way, that, that can cause some friction amongst them as well.
Yeah, another question on sort of the deployment aspect is, so do you actually have employees working for individual teams? How does that work? Because basically, obviously, you might end up having like both teams as your client, for example.
Sure.
So is it the idea that you have specific people dedicated to an individual team, or to whatever extent you can say like, well, what's your
Okay.
strategy on just how do you mitigate that issue?
Yeah, no, we don't have employees on individual teams.
Hmm.
We just have contacts that we train on those teams to be able to handle our materials. So the book guy that I mentioned that follows around the head coach, that's going to be, an employee of the team that we have trained to be able to handle that role.
Hmm.
So, those guys are incredibly important to us. They're often our internal cheerleaders there at the various organizations, and certainly their ability to interpret our stuff and kind of work with us directly just to help set up their charts for the coming week is something that is crucial to our success. And and I guess your other question was that yes, we do have games where both teams are utilizing our services, and just kind of with that model is that we give both teams their information, and that's really it. I mean, there's not really a whole lot proprietary that they're telling us. That of course, we wouldn't share that with us regardless. But kind of the information that they're sharing. But normally it's not anything that would give one side advantage to the other either.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you would essentially have access to whatever public profile of the team is available. And you presumably have developed that across all teams, regardless, from the beginning, just to get all the
Correct.
extra data.
Right,
And
right,
so
right.
you
Yeah,
can certainly
occasionally you'll find out that, our kicker stubbed his toe on Thursday, so we're going to have to go to the backup or something like that, which
Mhm,
may not always be public information, but
mhm.
obviously that's we can work around those things.
Yeah. I guess on that note as well, are the recommendations, so the book that you showed, are they team specific in any way? Or because I assume like the team is feeding in individual data, and then you also have this more generic publicly available data from I guess, game and team stats and things like that. So, to what extent are you sort of is like team specific data being fed into the algorithm that helps them make decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a blend of information.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, the big thing that we use just that's kind of publicly available is the point spread for the games. So,
Hmm.
I mean, there's no better source than Vegas to go for that. So, yeah, if we're trying to figure out, who's the favorite, who's the underdog, highest scoring, lowest scoring game. We just get the Vegas line for NFL games, college games, even just kind of the smaller colleges. A lot of times, that you can get those numbers. We've got some high schools that, typically they can feed us that information. Um, but there's also some things that we just can't pick up on from publicly available information. So kind of a good example is that, let's say we're working with a college team that's got a freshman field goal kicker. Well, we have, unless we want to dig into some high school stats or something along those lines, I mean, we really have, no concept of how he's going to perform at that level. And so, just kind of working with the teams to understand like, hey, how is he looking at practice? And let's say he's got a 45-yard field goal in the opening weekend. What is our best projection on his success rate for that particular kick? So we can kind of give our teams some guidelines and some kind of some curves from which to work. But it's definitely a conversation that we have with each of our teams, and we kind of our process is that we'll have 8 or 10 inputs that we utilize to create our charts. And, before we create their books for the week, that's, we always pass those over to our teams. Like, hey, based on public information, here's, our best estimate as to what this game is going to look like. And then just give them an opportunity to review that and make some adjustments, as they see fit.
Yeah, I really. It's funny to hear about the Vegas betting as a source of information. Isn't I totally understand why you do that. It's interesting to see how much because for example, like voting estimates and things like that. People like to use these betting odds just essentially to encapsulate. I know people try to think of it as like this is some type of ensemble method and something like that, and that you're
Sure.
just averaging across opinions. And I don't think maybe that's right. One, I don't know, but so I'll just be totally honest on that. But at the
Sure.
same time, I think it has some more to do with the fact that these betting odds essentially have to do with a large number of things that you can't formalize and you can't
Mhm.
quantify, but our brains are still pretty good at fitting it together. So it's the idea that when we're trying to make these statistical predictions or data science predictions, ultimately we're usually having to formalize our model for describing these things. Um, and that can get us pretty far in certain circumstances, but there's
Yeah.
many cases where they don't.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of pressure off as well. I found is that, I mean, if you want to get a team's opinion as to whether or not that they're the favorite of the underdog, that sometimes they have a hard time admitting that they might be the underdog, and or
Mhm.
if it's us creating the numbers, then that you would kind of have the feeling like, oh yeah, you guys don't, you know, think that we're that good or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a independent way of getting us. I mean, hey, Vegas is in business for a reason, and
Mhm.
if there's a better way of assessing who's the favorite and the underdog or high scoring, low scoring, well, we can, we should all quit our jobs and do that. 'Cause if we think that we're better than Vegas, then we would, we can make a better living doing that.
Yeah. I mean, also just the idea that when it comes to self assessment, there's plenty of good reasons why there in sort of the analytical professions, a high level of hypercritical self assessment is probably useful so that we can be correcting things. At the same time, you probably don't want to be over critical of your capability in certain competitive settings because there's no competitive advantage to that. You want to be going in confidently because that's ultimately what's going to maximize your performance. Similarly, I guess as data scientists, we can just consider it. Maybe it doesn't hurt if we think that we're smarter than we really are, because at least it gives us the courage to sit in front of a computer for an extra, 4 hours a day, trying to
Sure.
work things out, just to get things moving ahead.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. A little bit more generally, because one of the things that has interested me is the idea of, and I guess this is related to that more subjective, um, non-formalistic view of data possibilities. Is or no, or step out on a limb here, where um, there are certain data science projects that I think really have a lot of runway. Where and I happen to be in the two fields that I've worked in most prominently have a massive amount of runway for data scientists, where it's effectively 10 people could spend their full on careers working on these things, and there's always just going to be more data science work to do. Um, where in sports, because you focus on football, um, where, for example, in football, do you see the most runway for data science activities, even if it's just in your gut? Where do you think that is? Where does football fall with regard to other sports? And then also, within football, where's a good place to put a lot of your analytical effort?
Sure. I mean, to take that last question first, I mean, football is way behind the other major sports. Well, I guess the major team sports in America, and basketball and baseball. Baseball analytics has been very popular for some time. Of course, most out there be familiar with Moneyball, the book and the movie. Um, and the reason for that is that baseball is just a very binary sport.
Mhm.
It's either a ball or a strike. You swing and you miss. It's a hit or an out. Um, and there's a huge sample size involved with a couple hundred pitches a game, and 500-600 at bats and 162 games. So it's, from an analytical perspective, it is a much easier game to analyze than, as an example, football, where on any given play, you've got 22 guys moving in all sorts of different directions, just to try to break down, the value of a particular player on the football side is
Nearly
incredibly more
impossible. Yeah.
challenging than it might be for baseball, or even for basketball, where you can kind of assess, a shooting percentage, what they're like from different spots on the floor,
Mhm.
things of that nature. So it's just a much more difficult sport to analyze than, compared to those other two. Um, the biggest opportunity that I see with football is that there's a lot of data that has come out in the last few years related to player tracking.
Mhm.
And I mean, for those that have that follow the sport closely, if you're watching NFL on Sunday, you're seeing a lot more things with kind of the next gen stats. Or they'll be showing you what was the maximum speeds of the player on this particular play. The field goal was kicked. It's good from 58 yards or something like that. So there's just a lot more data that has been accumulated in the course of the last 5 years or thereabouts. And I think that just kind of the analytical guys that I talk to and work with, it's just there's a lot of data, and they're just starting to scratch the surface as to what to do with all of that. I know, just as an example from talking to a guy a few weeks ago, that they have. I mean, this is their draft preparation time of the year for NFL, and so they'll have what they call their combines, where they test them for how fast you can run in various drills. And and he has explained to me that hey, you used to just get the times, but now you're getting the times, and I'll know for based on position, how much their knee flexed when they were running around this particular cone in a 3 cone drill.
Mhm.
And it's like, I don't know what to do with this information, but I have it, and
Right.
people want to capture it. And, maybe that's something that's, incredibly important for a particular position on the field. Maybe it isn't. But I think there's just kind of huge opportunities there from both kind of a player evaluation and scheme, and, practice, and, whatever you can imagine, just, being able to kind of decipher this large dump of data that's now available in football, and helping just kind of, make sense of it all.
Yeah. So just, I guess maybe to break that down a little bit more. So it's like, you have these more novel statistics. a lot more like more highly granular statistics and information on individual athletes. Again, you talked about like the angle of their knee, the maybe like knee drive, the amount of acceleration in one of their like running tests and things like that.
Sure.
And so I guess the question is like, well, if you've been fixated on, fixated in the positive way, because, there's opportunity cost to anything that you do. If you've been focusing on, game performance, it might seem like, okay, it's hard to figure out how to translate this new data set or this new set of data to game performance. And so is the idea that maybe what you want to do is have some intermediate step where you translate it first into, for example, like training or injury or some of these additional ancillary statistics, and then in turn translate those into game performance or win performance? Is the idea that's like that? Is that probably what you would see as the steps where you're going to need to create some more intermediate metrics or intermediate steps in order to, I guess, bring this data to fruition?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just trying to make, what are the things that really make a difference, from that data. It might be something as simple as if you're watching someone in practice and you've got 9 freshman receivers running through drills. If you can start to capture some of these pieces of data, you might notice that, hey, this kid is creating a lot more separation from the defensive backs than his counterparts. One problem that you have in football is that the success of one player is often predicated on the performance of others. So if you're trying to evaluate how a wide receiver is performing, that hey, if a receiver gets wide open, that's fantastic. But if the offensive tackle missed his block or the quarterback decided to throw to somebody else, that that his work on that play can go completely unnoticed. So I think it's just kind of coming up with different ways of evaluating players, and I think the NFL has been getting better with that. In that understanding that hey, it may not always be the guys with the best stats that necessarily are the same players, and can use some of these metrics just to be able to put some of these guys on the same scale for comparison. Just based on some of this this data that is being kind of isolate the performance of each player just on its own merits, and not in conjunction necessarily with how his teammates are doing around him.
Yeah. On the issue of sort of irreducible complexity, where there's complexity to these elements, and there's only so much that you can untangle. Do you think that it is a problem of, well, not a problem? Do you think that the solution is essentially collecting more data, or to some extent, is it just where does the buck stop with the irreducible complexity? Is it just collect more and do more analysis, add more, I guess, factors and condition it, or on some level, just to say, here's the error margin and try to operate around that?
Yeah, no, honestly, I haven't been able to tackle it much myself, just to kind of understand, how good the data is, and kind of what else there is. I guess I haven't had a chance to dive into it, myself, to really kind of understand that. But my just personal assessment, just kind of as an outside observer, is that certainly it was a data problem for a long time. But now, I think the data is there, and it's just, I think it's much more of an interpretation issue at this point than it is like, hey, we need to capture more data. If that makes
is
sense.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that is really interesting. I don't envy the challenge of doing that. There are in my area, especially with regard to patient monitoring, there are certain effectively blind spots that I have in my own work, and just like, yeah, I'm never going to be able to really. There's something going on here. It's probably essential, but I'll never be able to exploit that given the nature of a given data set or how things are acquired. So I definitely appreciate the challenge involved in what you're describing there.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that's been kind of interesting to me, or something I think the NFL that's done is smart, is that in the last few years they've ran a contest. They call it their Big Data Bowl,
Hmm.
where they just have a problem that they're trying to solve, or they want to learn about a particular issue. So they'll just dump a data set out there, and anyone can enter the contest and just come up with their ideas as to what's the proper solution. I knew that one year they had something about how can you measure how many rushing yards would come on a particular play,
Hmm.
and what are the elements that are kind of driving how much success or how much yardage was going to come from a particular run play. And the winners were from, I can't remember what country it was from, but it wasn't a country that was playing football.
Hmm.
But we're just kind of looked at it that just come from a completely independent perspective, and just came up with some fascinating conclusions that like the running back himself had very little impact on the success of a run play. It was just, it pretty much all came down to the quality of the offensive line and what size of a hole it could generate. So,
Oh, that's interesting.
so yeah, I mean, for people that are kind of interested in looking into this and or trying to get into the careers, like there are some opportunities like that, just to kind of mess around with some data and then see what you can come up with.
To what extent is it possible for coaches or teams individually to start generating useful sort of experimental data? Because we've talked about irreducible complexity. We've talked about the fact that there is this lack of counterfactual information. And so, is there any idea where essentially coaches can create war games, so to say, where they effectively test these things out on their own players in order to increase that sample size and just sort of increase that experimental space, so to say?
I've never heard of anything
Hmm.
really along those fronts. I mean, we do our best just as a company, just kind of in the off season and things of that nature, just to aggregate a lot of that information that happened during the course of the season, and
Hmm.
kind of share that with our teams. And we'll have a fourth down report where we talk about how often teams have gone for it on fourth and whatever yards
Hmm.
from whatever the field, and like comparing that to years past, and things of that nature. So that kind of, to your earlier point, just to we try to keep teams from focusing too much on their own information,
Hmm.
just from the perspective that oh gosh, or we were just terrible on this last year, or we were we did fantastic on this last year. And that's like, hey, yes, you did. That's true, but you also only had 5 or 6 of these situations. So there's probably not that probably doesn't mean much in terms of predictive nature for the coming season. So we do a lot of work in trying to aggregate a lot of the results that our teams put together, just to kind of build a more compelling case, or kind of share with them just more of what um, the actual results are, versus just trying to get bogged down in kind of an individual team's results.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that is really interesting. I again like that type of strategy. Because when you're talking about, it's like, oh well, how much is, like, I guess, a rush or a pass? How far does it get you? And you're saying, well, it matters less on the person running the ball than, for example, how much of an opening could be created. Naturally, part of me thinks, oh well, it's like, could we try to experiment on that, where you would essentially coach and test around scenarios where you tell the players on one side to essentially try to maximize some parameter that works well, and then
For
just
sure.
see
Right.
what type of effect that is. Um, on, I guess, on a similar note, because this is actually spurred from a conversation that I was having with somebody who does hockey analytics, and they're really excited because essentially, some like their sort of HD 360 camera system was now being installed in a lot of these arenas. And so effectively, the person they're looking for was a computer vision a computer vision scientist to start, dealing with this now, terabyte of data per game or whatever it would be. Is football going into something similar to that, where effectively you're going to go from basically, you talked about, we're going to be doing some like Markov chain modeling and things like that, to saying, okay, what we need actually are people with, like, for example, computer vision skills, or some of these weirder skills, just not weirder, but one of these even less traditional skills, to even generate the data that we're going to have. So we essentially want to start capturing more data. Because you mentioned, going back and looking at plays throughout a season and curating that data for your decision making. What do you see as, like, as you who's going to start getting added to sort of the data science hub in football?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't claim any particular expertise on kind of that area, but
Mhm.
I mean, to me, like I said earlier, I mean, I think the people that can kind of take the large data that's available today and find the meaningful factors that the coaches really want to see from that. I mean, I think that's going to be kind of that. There's always going to be a great need for the person that can give the coach exactly what information that they want. Um, and I think one thing that's very important to consider, just at least for working with teams in the middle of the season, is how little time that coaches really have for things like us,
Mhm.
or kind of breaking. That's fantastic if you can give them 100 pages of stats, but they aren't going to read that.
Right.
You need to condense it down into something that they can digest in 10 or 15 minutes. It's not that it isn't interesting or good, but again, if you've got all this player tracking data or whatever the case might be, it's there's just so much value, I think, in being able to take all that, assimilate it down into what are the 4 or 5 things that the coaches really need to know and can make a difference to help them win that weekend. So, I mean, I think that's something that is huge. When you talk about just kind of the different angles, and I mean, I never really thought about that before, but it does make a lot of sense that if you can kind of figure out that hey, the size of the hole is going to impact the running game, and if you can get some better cameras in there, just to really perhaps dissect something like an offensive lineman, how quickly he can get his foot in the proper position in order to make a block that could create a bigger hole or something along those lines. That isn't when you're breaking down film today, you're going to get a video camera that shows all 22 players in the film, and some of that minutia is going to be lost. So yeah, I mean, I think that could that's a very interesting concept, that if you can kind of really dig in and follow the progress and see really the intricacies of each of the players and start to break that down, that could be kind of a next level, just kind of building on that concept.
Yeah, because I guess so. What spurred it was the idea that you had mentioned earlier that there's these new statistics coming in. The biomechanical angles, things like that, acceleration. And I was thinking, it's like, well, how can you? And I guess the baseline problem is, the one we started off describing. It's this small in non-counterfactual decision realm, which is, it's like, man, that's just so hard. Like, I don't envy it. It's really hard. And so the question is, like, well, how can we start enriching this initial data space? And you've mentioned, well, we're going to bring in these secondary statistics and try to figure out how we can start fitting those in. But the idea is, but those don't maybe directly relate, because they're from maybe non-game scenarios and things like that. They're ancillary. And so if you think, so, well, how can we enrich it with the most game-like things? Well, as you mentioned, you are looking back and looking at different plays across the entire season and enriching your data set that way, which I think is really good. And that's something that I wouldn't mind us circling back on quickly.
Sure.
The idea is, at the same time, it's like, well, maybe you could enrich it with the counterfactuals that you're missing during those practice scenarios. But then again, there's a lot of heavy lifting in there. That's not something where you just say, "Oh, there's a concept. Now let's implement it." It's like, okay, how do we do that? What technology do we need? Which nerds do we need to get on the ground actually making sure that this math that the data is correct and things like that. But yeah, no, it is exciting that that you've identified these interesting new places while not getting totally sidetracked. I think that's one of the interesting things. You as a business owner, there's so many things that you can do. Um, how do you not get sidetracked? How do you not? There's so many things that you can chase. How do you make sure you don't just like chase every opportunity? What do you focus on?
Yeah, I mean, we've just been very focused on just game strategy, and really it's kind of getting feedback from our customers as to what's important to them. So I mean, as an example, it's and we started this is all about fourth downs and 2 points, and just kind of giving them the charts, and then just in talking to our guys, just like at our second year, our first year we had one client, and the second year we had 4 or 5, and one of them was Montana State. And after their games, the head coach's son was our, and so I would just email him some of the thoughts about the game, like, hey, here's how you kind of manage your time in the at the end of the half, or we just kind of talk about it from not really deep and kind of some of the fourth down things, of course, but just kind of some of the I would just say just a basic game strategy type of situations. I mean, it's not complicated. I guess it's not really complicated math. It's just more logic type problems. How do we use our timeouts at the end of the first half on on a 2-minute drill? So we would just go back and forth, and just kind of make a long story short. After 4 or 5 weeks, I realized that they really enjoyed that feedback from us on the things outside of the heavy math portion of this, so both down decision making. So it really just turned into a conversation. Every Sunday night, I would just pass along my thoughts of the game, and Dad, the head coach, would chime back with kind of what he was thinking as it kind of came along. And so really that was something that ended up becoming central to our offering, is that okay, these coaches are actually looking for feedback on their games, for things outside of fourth downs. What if we talked about timeout usage, and when to accept or decline a penalty, or some of these other things that come up at the end of the game, like should we allow the opponent to score a touchdown because that's better than letting them kick a field goal at the end of the game. So so that's really kind of driven our pathway, is just kind of talking to the coaches and seeing what it is that's of interest to them. Again, a lot of it just hasn't been really heavy math. It's just kind of helping them solve some of these logic problems, or bringing other logic problems to their attention, and helping them have some good conversations with their staff to help them follow this properly. I mean, really, how we spend most of our time in the off season is talking directly with our teams, and that we'll have a 2-hour conversation with a particular school or team, and walk them through the situations that they had over the course of the year, and talk about different things from a statistical perspective that they can do better. And so I'm not sure if I completely answered your question there, or what the original
No,
was.
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah. I was also glad. It's like, oh, cool. So basically, they spend as much time talking to people as every other data scientist does. Just like that feeling, that space, trying to figure out where you can add value.
Correct. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just, talking to the teams, bringing scenarios to their space. And what we found is that, and I think it just kind of goes into decision making in general, that it's very hard to make a decision, with 60,000 people screaming in your ear, on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon,
Hmm.
if you haven't thought about it, previously. So, bringing some of these scenarios to their attention, and we encourage them all to have a meeting on Thursday. Just spend a half an hour with your staff, just going over strategy in different situations, and kind of getting comfortable with that component of the game, such that even as a head coach, if you do something, you don't want the rest of your staff to be thinking, "Oh, what's he doing that for?"
Hmm.
It's kind of a weird decision. So just kind of get everyone on the same page, have some good discussion about it, and you're much more likely to make that choice on Saturday or Sunday if it's something that you really thought about ahead of time. So that's really a lot of the work that we end up doing in the off season is working with these teams, help facilitating those discussions, and just kind of keep drilling into the same concepts for them.
Yeah, I guess one thing that you brought up two interesting things. One is the issue about whether or not how do you get an entire team to sort of start internalizing some of those data driven approaches, and so effectively when you're making a more data driven decision, how it seems not quite as crazy as it might from a more heuristic approach. But maybe I think maybe more interesting question than that is that you brought up, with the 50,000 opinionated people screaming at you, um, is that there's also seemed to be like an asymmetry in the mistakes that you make. So, for example, if you make a mistake in the way that everyone else would have anticipated you to, so say you call some type of play, and that's what the majority of people would have done anyway, that mistake is forgivable.
Sure.
Whereas if you do something that's counterintuitive, well, then you're just this guy who's off the rails. And so the idea is that even though um, one mistake might actually even have a less, that first mistake might actually even be worse. Because if it's something that a large number of people anticipate, well, it's probably, you'd probably gain more by making the right decision in the first place. So there's that sort of asymmetry thing. Do you manage that? Is that formalized in some way, or is it just part of the stress?
Yeah, no, I mean, you described that perfectly. In that, yes, there are many common mistakes that teams make, and it's just become so ingrained in the football culture that the common one is just you know 4th and 1 anywhere on the field. I mean, unless it's an extremely unique situation, is from a math perspective, is almost always to go for it.
Hmm.
But like deep in your own territory or whatever. I mean, teams almost always punt, and it's so accepted over the course of time that when that move is made, that it's just accepted, and nobody really gives it a lot of thought. I mean, it's changing a little bit, but in general, it's not it's not something that teams are going to get called out on. But yeah, I mean, the counter to that is that if a team does go for it and what happened to miss and gives up a touchdown or something along those lines, that they're going to get absolutely they can get skewered from both the fans and the press
Hmm.
from doing that. So I mean, it does create kind of a disincentive for them to try that. Um, so yeah, I mean that's definitely a challenge, and kind of again why we work on kind of the education piece. It's like, hey, here's teams that are doing it, and here's them having success, and really the success rate on this is really high. So we do a lot of work just to try to get them over the hurdles. And but yeah, I mean that's definitely a dynamic that it's very prevalent in the football space and what we deal with.
Cool. Um, I guess since we only have a little bit more time left, one thing, since we have a lot of early career data scientists and statisticians, so people who are either in university or have recently left, and they might think, it's like, well, it looks like Michael has a cool job. Like what's like how could they get into the game, so to speak? Obviously you started with us, a client, and you built it that way, and you built your offerings from that. But I guess there's several interesting things here. One, obviously you're the owner of your company. You've literally built up this structure. And maybe it seems that people coming in now, they might have two options. One, they can try and like independently consult, or they can try and get a job with a company like yours, or with some company in Vegas with the betting. and things like that. How would you suggest that people who are interested in dipping their toe in the water get involved? Is it the NFL Datathon? Is that the thing that they should do?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to get started. And I mean, the guys that are guys and ladies, so yeah, then there's definitely some ladies doing this as well. Um, I mean, the people that have won that competition the last few years, I mean, from what I've seen, that they get scooped up,
Mhm.
by teams, pretty quickly from doing that. Um, it's interesting when if I meet with a NFL team in particular. I mean, they'll have anywhere from you know two or three, and I think some larger departments may have four or five analytics types in there, and they all have kind of a unique story. I mean, there's not it's not like being a lawyer where you can
Mhm.
kind of plot a steady course and you'll be a lawyer one day. For me, I mean, I worked in the financial sector as a statistician and consultant for 20 years, and really just, I just got started by watching games and realized, or um, some of the choices that the coaches were making, didn't seem quite right to me, and really just started with the back of the envelope and moved it over to Excel, and kind of turned into an obsession and turned it into a company. And really had no grand plan from the outset, but really it was a case where one thing just kind of led into another, and now we have a company with a pretty nice following. Um, I think that that's one pathway to always look at, is that, I mean, it's hard to get started, but if you've kind of got your own unique idea and a new angle on something, that's always going to catch people's attention. Um, I know, one guy that I met from basketball had his own blog and ended up, gaining some popularity, and ended up, hooking up with a team that way. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, if you're in the university, I think with a lot of, there's some schools that have some really good sports analytics program. I know there's one at Davidson.
Mhm.
Professor Tim Chartier's worked with him on a few things, and he's fantastic, and spoken to some analytics groups in colleges at a few spots. But I mean, I think just kind of getting involved if you're at a university, and just volunteering with the various programs, just to kind of help understand. I mean, you never know what connections that you'll make, but also just getting to understand like the coaches and players' mindsets. I mean, particularly for someone like myself who just kind of maxed out at intramural ball in college, that doesn't really have that playing and coaching background, just to kind of get involved in their world. Um, so yeah, I mean, no linear pathway, but certainly I think that there's some different angles that could be pursued, just to kind of get yourself off the ground there.
Cool. Yeah. No. I really do like the idea of people who have sort of unique and creative angles, because I think that it's something that within our data science community, the creative element of what we do is well regarded, and people understand that there's a lot of creativity and imagination when it comes to actually for example connecting data set A that people care about to data set B that people care about, and how to actually figure out something of value in that way. But externally, people I think sometimes mistake this as a little bit of like a dry sort of hyper systematic career, and it isn't. There's such a massive level of creativity, and also how far hard work can get you. Just that element of like, if you're willing to just log more hours analyzing your data, you'll have more insights, you'll have a better idea about where to go forward. So I hope that anyone who is interested can follow the advice that you've given, even if it just means you pester people at your local athletics department and say,
Yeah, no, that's
I've got time.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's it's kind of, like I said, it's very interesting just to ask the people how they got started. And it's uh, hey, I was writing for local paper and just kept pestering the general manager and sending him my thoughts on various things. But yeah, or you just knew the right person and happened to have the I mean, mean, football and coaching, it's really kind of a small world. Um, I mean, even at the college level, you've got 100, 30 head coaches, and usually have 9 or 10 assistants. So I mean, there's it's really only a universe of um, a couple thousand people that are at the higher levels of football, and so it's just trying to find a connection to get within that circle is. I mean, it's a challenge at the outset, and certainly one that we faced. Not really having any connections. So, yeah, once you get in, you can create some opportunities for yourself.
Cool. Yeah, I guess my final question is sort of building off of what you've just described, where to what extent can people sort of communicate? 'Cause, there's an infinite number of people willing to give their opinions on things, and willingness to give one's opinion is not really like an exceptional trait. Some of us just make podcasts, but you get the idea that what are good ways that someone can actually distinguish themselves as someone who is well grounded, a good critical analyst of this domain, as opposed to somebody who's just giving a few opinions and throwing around some numbers. Is it like, should they create a track record of being right with things retrospectively, so they give good retrospective analysis? Is it good prospective guesses, or I guess is it's anyone's game that you show that you're good at critical thinking, thinking critically?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was certainly something that I was surprised about at the end of as I started off this journey, again, as someone that had just worked in the financial field and, no background in, football whatsoever, that, I was really reluctant to, like, hey, if I'm talking to, head coach of a university, are they really wanting to know what I think about these particular situations? And it was really just kind of a surprise to me that they did. And so I mean, actually, I'd never really thought about why that is. I mean, I guess that maybe we sounded like we knew that what we were talking about, and maybe that we spent some time to understand their worlds and try to see things from their perspective. That helped us to kind of perhaps win that trust. And I kind of think for us that although we just started off with a couple of clients that were kind of a couple of small schools, that we were really fortunate to get. I think if we had started off at the NFL level, we probably would have struggled. But just kind of starting off with some of the kind of building up to that, and working with people that could kind of give us insights into their worlds and work closely with us, and just kind of help us increase our knowledge of the sport, and what suggestions that we make are welcome, which ones just to kind of edit out, and just kind of find like the right tone with which to to get started with. And then I guess that helped us to build some credibility as well, that hey, as you start to move your way up the ladder, that you've got the credibility that hey, you guys aren't the guinea pigs, but we have worked with clients in the past, and have had success with them, and again, we're just not starting off with them. So but it was kind of a challenge as we're getting started, just to kind of get comfortable in that environment and feel like you're an accepted part of that circle, particularly when that's not your background.
Yeah, well, I will quickly interject on one thing where you said, why would they, for some reason they thought we knew what we were talking about. But the idea is, you might not know more overall about a domain, but you might be the most knowledgeable person you'll meet on that subdomain, because you looked very specifically at the data and you stayed fixated. So your domain of expertise, while it might start off with narrow, you might have been the deepest person that they had met to cover that, and maybe that's a great way to begin.
And we try to make it very clear to our coaches that, I mean, I think it's almost good that, I mean, I don't have the experience of coaching, so I'm not here to criticize your play call. I can't draw up a play on your blackboard that would have any chance of success. We have a very narrow focus, and we're just trying to help you make good decisions over the course of the game. And instead of relying on your gut instinct, here's another tool that can help you make those with some math to back it up.
Cool. Well, I really appreciate your insight on this. I guess my final question is data science, analytics, statistics. Do you think that are all these terms useful and sort of interchangeable in the area of sports analytics, or do you think that there's some areas where maybe people differ in their mentalities and how they deal with these things?
Yeah, I think within sports, everything is listed as analytics, and there probably should be some more definition within that, and that anything it seems like related to math and that is kind of grouped into that analytics category. So I'm not really too familiar, to be honest, with all the differentials of those types of roles. But I know just at least within sports that anything that's related to math, or the people behind the scenes looking at the numbers, that they're all just kind of rolled into that the analytics category. And the thing too is that I think it's so new, particularly what I see at the NFL level, is that they may only have a couple different analytics guys. So their roles can be wildly different from one. The different things that they're being asked to do is working with us, or helping evaluate draft prospects, or help with the budget, or just try to identify
sales.
Exactly. So it's just a very wide ranging type of role that they may be asked to do, which I think could be interesting. But it's not like if you walked into an NFL team as an analytics, that there's going to be a training guide with here's exactly what your role is going to look like. It's they could be one of 100 different projects that you'll be asked to do, and more than likely it's there's not going to be any specific guidelines as to how it is that you're going to be achieving that objective.
Oh, Michael, I've really enjoyed hearing from you. Not just as someone who works in I would say a very subjective and sort of challenging data-driven field, but also it's always nice to see entrepreneurs and how they make headway in their profession into these new domains. So I think that's something that's interesting. I think that probably a lot of the listeners are also interested to see that, because there is this entrepreneurial drive about how people can be forging their own ways forward with their data science careers, their analytics careers, and seeing how they can make those opportunities for themselves. So I think you definitely hit on a number of interesting things, and I do appreciate it. And just sort of giving your own opinion about where these types of things are going and how to succeed at. So I wish you the best of luck on these things, and it'll be cool. Maybe someday we'll flip on the television and actually see we'll see more of your books being carried around in the stands and behind the coaches and things like that. I think that'd be fun.
Very good. All right. Well, thanks so much, Glenn, for having me on, and enjoy the conversation.
Hey guys, it's Glenn. Thanks for your time today. I hope you liked today's episode. If you did, please consider smashing that like button. It's the single, simplest, fastest way to make sure that YouTube shows this video to more people. If you really want to go crazy, consider subscribing or going to our website and joining the mail list. If you want to go totally crazy beyond that, forward this to a friend or colleague who you think might enjoy this too. We're a small channel and every bit helps. Our next episode will be coming out next week, so in the meantime, feel free to look around the channel and see other videos that might be of interest. As a quick disclaimer, the views expressed on the show do not represent anything other than the people saying those words, views, etc. like that. It doesn't mean anything about their employers or their employers' views, or some thing about their employers or their neighbor's cat or anyone else not saying the words. And in fact, given that people tend to change their views when they're thoughtful enough, it might not even represent the views of the speaker by the time you're hearing the episode. So definitely come back and see if they've changed their views at a later date. They also don't represent the views of our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors. You can check them out on our website.